The non-belief is incoherent omnibus. Number 16. The argument from unfalsifiability. Premise 1. Belief claims are private mental events, making them inherently unfalsifiable through empirical methods. As beliefs are private mental events, they are not subject to direct empirical observation, testing, and verification. Instead, all we have are fallible self-reports of individual subjective experience, which are prone to error due to faulty reasoning such as biases and presumed objectivity and rationality. Further, a suspension of judgment does not equate to a suspension of belief. Secondly, a suspension of judgment as an admission that one does not know the truth value of P substantiates only agnosticism, an epistemological position. It does not address belief, a doxastic position, at all, much less substantiate an absence of belief. Thirdly, whereas the suspension of judgment is an act of will, the suspension of belief presumes that one can choose what one does and does not believe, which is an extraordinary claim that requires extraordinary evidence. Premise 2. Scientific claims require falsifiability for empirical substantiation. For a hypothesis to be considered scientific, it must be falsifiable. That is, it must be capable of being tested and potentially refuted by evidence. Therefore, claims of complete absence of belief are unscientific.
Let's start with the first premise. Belief claims are private mental events, making them inherently unfalsifiable through empirical methods. This premise is fundamentally flawed. Belief claims are not private mental events, they are publicly asserted statements about belief. Like any other public statement, they can be evaluated, questioned, and debated. While the belief itself is an internal mental state that isn't directly observable, behavior, language, and actions provide strong evidence for the belief. For example, if someone claims, "I believe fire is hot," but repeatedly touches fire, their actions contradict that claim and cast doubt on its sincerity. Treating belief claims as private, inaccessible events tilts the conversation toward solipsism, implying that no belief claim can ever be meaningfully evaluated. This kind of extreme skepticism is impractical for meaningful discourse and inconsistent with how belief claims function. Public statements about beliefs are regularly scrutinized and challenged, and dismissing this as impossible or meaningless would undermine any rational conversation. Premise 2 asserts, scientific claims require falsifiability for empirical substantiation. While this is true in the context of scientific inquiry, it is irrelevant when applied to belief states, such as positive belief, disbelief, or lack of belief, because these are psychological and philosophical positions, not scientific claims. As previously stated, belief claims, as opposed to beliefs, are externally observable statements that can be evaluated and questioned. Consider that self-reports of beliefs are in fact belief claims. If you acknowledge that self-reports are fallible, you also acknowledge that they can be tested and refuted based on observable evidence, such as contradictory behavior. Accompanying premise 2 is a quote attributed to Karl Popper, author of The Logic of Scientific Discovery. This exact quote does not appear in Karl Popper's writings. While it might be a reasonable paraphrase of the concept of falsifiability, this misquote weakens the argument's precision and credibility. Popper's original focus was on theories and scientific demarcation, not psychological beliefs. Applying this principle to belief states is an overreach that misrepresents Popper's intent. The conclusion, claims of complete absence of belief are unscientific, fails to support the idea that non-belief is incoherent. Belief claims are public statements that can be evaluated for consistency and coherence through behavior, language, and observable evidence. The selective application of this reasoning to non-belief alone is arbitrary and unjustified, as the same standard could equally be applied to positive and negative belief claims. The argument collapses under scrutiny. It begins with a flawed premise that mischaracterizes belief claims as private mental events and misapplies falsifiability to psychological stances. The misattributed Popper quote further diminishes its credibility, and the conclusion selectively targets non-belief without justification. Ultimately, the argument fails to prove that non-belief is incoherent and misunderstands the principles it tries to invoke.